Hello and welcome to History by Hollywood, a podcast series that examines the real events and people behind fact-based movies. This is episode 28 for Sunday the 8th of April 2018. In today's episode we concentrate on the 1996 musical Evita, director Alan Parker's cinematic take on the Andrew Lloyd-Webber and Tim Rice musical that first hit the stage some 40 years ago in 1978 after an album released some 2 years earlier. The movie stars Madonna in the lead role, supported by Antonio Banderas as our narrator Shay, as well as Jonathan Pryce as Juan Peron. The original stage musical became the first British musical to receive an Antoinette Perry Award, better known as a Tony Award, on Broadway. It's the stage equivalent of an Oscar, for Best Musical. My name is Andrew Blischik, and with me as ever is Martin Darlington.
Hello everybody. Just a bit of news. We now have on our links page at www.historybyhollywood.com/links a link to a subscribe direct from your Android device for those on Android. You do need a podcast app. Now, we've checked it and we think it works. Andrew, it didn't work for.
That's a little tricky.
And someone at my place at work, it did work for them. But if anyone wants to try that and let us know if it works or not, if not, I will try and do some work. I've also managed to work how to edit the blue links at the homepage, which is also the episodes page at the bottom. It was listing the most recent 5 shows if people wanted to go to that show's particular page. I've now managed to adjust that so it shows all the episodes, so looking back should be easier.
Great. Just some news on what's coming up with our podcast. Next time out, on Sunday the 22nd of April, we'll be covering Steven Spielberg's Lincoln, starring the incredible Daniel Day-Lewis in the titular role. After that, 2 weeks later, on the 6th of May, we'll be covering In the Heart of the Sea, a movie directed by our old friend Ron Howard, starring another History by Hollywood alumni, Chris Helmsworth, and Cillian Murphy, thank you, depicting the story of the Nantucket whaler, the Essex, in the early 19th century, which eventually inspired the novel Moby Dick. Although this movie passed under the radar at the time of its release in late 2015, that was largely due to the reboot of the Star Wars franchise, which was released just a week later, and we urge you to really check out this movie. It's quite good.
Okay, we've also had a donation. Huge HBH shout out to listener Frank Simmons, who very kindly and generously donated to us. He went to the About page of the website, historybyhollywood.com, where there's a Buy Now button, and you buy our gratitude. But of course, it's very welcome as it goes towards the cost of renting and buying movies, and of course the books that give us the research material for the background and reality check. So thank you very much, Frank.
Okay, so let's get on to some corrections and erratas. Listener Mike King wrote to suggest that near the end of Zodiac, when a San Francisco Police Department cop visits Mike Mageau towards the end of the movie, he asks him to identify a man who shot him, and we get the byline at the bottom of the screen telling us that it's Ontario CA. We thought he might have been setting the scene in Ontario, Canada, but apparently, according to Mike King, thank you very much, he confirmed the suggestion that we made that there is an Ontario, California, which is south of Los Angeles near Riverside, which also featured in the movie, and over 400 miles from San Francisco, so perfectly reasonable for a policeman to have flown down there. Thanks for the correction, Mike. Yeah,
that was a good one. Grant Kennedy Musgrove sent us a message through the Facebook page, which you can find at facebook.com/History by Hollywood. And now this is going back a couple of episodes, but we'd already recorded Zodiac when we got Grant's message, but going back to Tombstone, he said, epic review, as always, one of my favourite movies. Just a point of discussion. Apparently there's an ongoing argument about the I'm your Huckleberry line in the movie. Many people claim that what Val Kilmer actually says is I'm your Hucklebearer, which means a pallbearer for a funeral. Val's attempt at a drawn-out Southern R makes it sound like Huckleberry. Supposedly the script says Berry, but these can be changed and frequently are. So there's a link to an article that explains it, just a fun debate about a great scene. Thanks again for all that you all do. I've missed several episodes because I haven't seen the movies, but I have several in my queue. So I'm just going to quickly play the 2 times that Val Kilmer used that phrase and let people judge themselves. And on the show notes page for Tombstone, which is now easier to find, I will put a link to Rafael Marquez's blog where they discuss this.
I'm your huckleberry.
We've also got some feedback from long-time supporter Gary Shavit. He emailed us to our hosts@historybyhollywood.com email address. Gary says, I've been good about doing my homework. I even watched The Founder, though I thought, what the hell do I care about the early days of McDonald's? But you guys are going to have to do something really extraordinary for me to watch bleeping Madonna as Evita again. I'm going to trust my 20-year-old memories. I will brush up on the Peron rain in Argentina, but I'm not watching an Andrew Lloyd-Webber film for a second time, even for you. Needless to say, your podcast since I last wrote to you have been superb. Keep up the good work. Regards, Gary.
Bless him.
Thank you very much. That's lovely.
That's really good. And we also had another long-time supporter and fellow podcaster, Tom Secker of Clandestine fame. He said, wrote to us and said, Andrew Martin, I hope you're well. Been catching up on History by Hollywood episodes. Very much enjoyed The Founder. Great learning a bit more about the story. And he was curious about how much of it was based in reality. One point of difference, he found the brothers McDonald to be smug hypocrites. He said at least Ray Kroc saw the potential, was ambitious and worked hard. But the notion that disapproving of powdered milkshakes somehow, made them stand-up fellows, it left a bit of a sour taste in his mouth, pun firmly intended. He said not that he disliked them as characters, he's a fan of both actors and thought they played the parts very well. But I think Tom felt that the movie did portray Ray Kroc as the bad guy and the McDonald's as the hard done by sort of decent people.
Yeah.
Personally, I don't agree. I think that one of the great things of that movie was it was so ambiguous and it very much led it up to us. But as Tom says at the end, a very good piece of cinema that stands up to quite contrasting interpretations, just like reality, I guess.
Yeah, good point. Go on. Tom then followed this up by sending us an interesting nugget a colleague of his had found while searching through some archives in Washington, D.C. It showed the interest government departments have in the entertainment industry. By the way, if you're interested in this kind of stuff, then do check out Tom's Clandestine podcast at spyculture.com, as this is an area in which he's done a lot of work and brings some surprising information to light. For example, the Department of Navy Information wrote regarding the Apollo 13 movie that we reviewed in episode 18 that they thought that the movie gave the Navy a very positive portrayal in the depictions of both Jim Lovell, he'd been a naval officer and a naval pilot, and his wife, whose portrayal showed, quote, the positive things accomplished through Navy-wise clubs and ombudsman organisations, unquote. The Navy apparently were less impressed with the level of profanity heard in the movie, which I didn't think there was much, and they thought that this could, quote, lead some viewers to an incorrect and negative view of military life and character, unquote, which leads us to wonder, has the author ever actually been to a military base?
I know, that's so
Navy, a Navy base. Navy's sailors got the reputation for swearing worst of all.
Yeah.
Okay, this sort of thing does show the level of attention that the military and other government departments give to, popular cultural references. And if a movie maker wants to access those military bases, the personnel, advice, etc., when they're making their movie, they leave themselves open to being persuaded to change this scene or adjust that character, etc. Nothing is as it seems should be our movie watchword, apparently.
Another fellow podcaster, Abel AK of the Tale of Rome podcast, which is thoroughly recommended, and you can find it at thetaleofrome.com. He wrote on the Spartacus episode page on the website that he's finally finished that monster two-parter, and really enjoyed the series, and it's very appreciated. And who knows, maybe if we can find another ancient Rome movie to cover in the future, we may try and get Abel on the show.
That'd be great.
And he can do reviews in English, Spanish, German and Chinese. Yeah, incredible guy. We've got no new reviews, so if anybody does feel like just giving us a star review and writing a few words, particularly on iTunes or on whichever platform you listen to us, that would be hugely welcome. And now, on with the show.
First off, as ever, let's do the story of the movie. Evita was a 1996 movie closely following the successful West End and Broadway stage musical of the same name that had been the first British musical to win a Tony Award for Best Musical. The movie was directed by Alan Parker and stars Madonna in the lead role of Eva Peron, aka Evita. It also featured Antonio Banderas as Shay. In some productions of the musical Evita, the Shay character is credited as Che Guevara, the revolutionary. Yet Tim Rice has said that in the stage musical they simply would use the name Shay, which is in Argentina is often used as an expression as mate or pal or friend. This is why the Cubans, alongside whom Che Guevara fought, nicknamed him Shay, as he used the expression so frequently. I would interpret the character far more like one of Shakespeare's chorus figures used in Henry V and Romeo and Juliet as a narrator to explain elements of context and to provide a foil for Evita's thoughts and actions, which makes much more sense than projecting the movie that this is somehow the famous revolutionary Che Guevara who happened to be everywhere in Evita's life at important events.
And in reality, he was 17 when the Perons came to power, and
would never have
by
met.
the time she died, he was on his way to Cuba. So
yeah, and it makes a lot more sense to
apparently
think of him
he
as a
wrote
narrator.
to her when she was saying about giving money to the poor and said, could he have a motorbike?
Okay.
And as a trainee doctor and quite educated middle class, I suspect he didn't get a positive reply, if he got one at all.
Back to the movie.
Yeah, several people were rumoured to be lined up for the lead role. Barbra Streisand said no. I think she was their first choice, understandably. Mariah Carey was considered, and incredibly, Zsa Gabor, but never serious contenders. And according to Showbiz Rumour, Madonna wrote to Alan Parker, Andrew Lloyd-Webber and Tim Rice asking to be seriously considered. She has a certain physical resemblance to Eva Peron.
She certainly does.
And she has a similar rags to riches journey, and her determination would appear to have swung it in her favour. Financially, the movie was a great success. It cost $50 million to make and returned somewhere between $140 million and $150 million worldwide, depending on the source. The stage musical I read somewhere has made over $1 billion worldwide.
Wow.
Yeah.
So a success all around. The movie was nominated for 5 Oscars and it won the Best Original Song category for You Must Love Me, an award it also won at the Golden Globes, along with Best Musical or Comedy and Best Actress in a Musical or Comedy for Madonna. Interestingly, until Evita was made, the record for costume changes in a movie was held by Elizabeth Taylor for Cleopatra, which we featured in episode 14 of History by Hollywood. But Madonna took the record away with this movie, having a staggering 46 costume changes during the 2-hour film.
Okay, we're just going to have a word about sources. The sources that the musical and the movie used and the sources we've used. It took its main source from a 1952 biography by Mary Main, initially published under the pseudonym Maria Flores, called Evita, the Woman with the Whip. It was the first highly critical biography of Eva Peron. Obviously, it was released the year she died. Much of its criticism has been proved to be historically inaccurate. Tim Rice has never admitted the influence of any particular word, saying he'd read many biographies, watched documentaries on the lady and the period, travelled to Buenos Aires to meet people who knew her. But the tone of the musical is very much in step with the tone of Mary Main's image as a self-serving demagogue who manipulated those around her to achieve her ambitions.
Other sources were just as varied and include a host of articles, reviews, a recently updated bio, Evita, The Real Lives of Eva Peron by Nicholas Fraser and Marissa Navarro, plus several online documentaries and The Cultural History of Peronism by Matthew Karish and Oscar Chamosa.
That was not an easy read. That's a bit turgid. It's interesting, but yeah, I don't think I'd have continued reading it if I wasn't doing it for the show.
Well, thank you.
I also listened to an Australian podcast, and I'm not having a dig at the Aussies, especially as there's one sat next to me. It's a series called Musicals Taught Me Everything I Know. It has 4 hosts, or this episode did, 2 ladies and 2 gentlemen, all of whom appear to be either stage performers or professionals in the theatre industry.
Just a warning here, we're almost about to go into Spitfire gliding territory, aren't we, with the Martin rant?
Yes.
Okay, be warned.
Well, they touched on the historical aspects of Evita, and they were very critical of the treatment of Eva Peron in the movie and the musical. Obviously musicals and songs, and it is generally composed at this sort of level by educated people, and I think they were saying They just jumped on the aristocratic Argentinians' opinion of her as a woman who virtually prostituted herself to get to the top. But then they fell into exactly the same trap and did exactly the same about Madonna having the lead role. And basically they said she can't sing. I mean, the snobbiness of these people was unbelievable. If they'd said, look, she's not professionally trained as a classical singer, that's fine. But whilst not everyone will like her music, I'm not a huge fan of her music, but I'm sorry, she can sing. And they got even worse about Mariah Carey, and she can absolutely, definitely sing. I don't think I'd choose to listen to any Mariah Carey song, even that Jolly Christmas one, but she can sing. And, I mean, record sales don't necessarily measure someone's singing ability, but they do reflect popularity. And if someone were unable to sing in tune, they wouldn't sell many records. Madonna appears in every list I could find globally as the globally best-selling female artist of all time, 4th overall behind the Beatles, Elvis and Michael Jackson. So don't tell me she can't flipping sing you never heard of stage wannabes. And the host also got very snobby about Lloyd-Webber's musical in general. One woman who's clearly a stage singer saying, "I've never felt challenged by any of his music, it's really simple stuff." Well, that's not the point. He's not writing music to challenge singers, he's writing music to entertain audiences. And again, if you look at the popularity of some of his shows, I'd say he's doing a pretty good job. If you want to be challenged, go and enter a triathlon and complete it while singing the entire Richard Wagner's complete Ring cycle.
Thank you,
Rant
Martin.
over.
Okay, so let's get on with the analysis. Let's do the synopsis and the reality check. The opening titles roll across a black screen and we hear some Spanish conversation. The screen soon reveals that we're in a movie theatre watching a black and white film. The lights go up, the movie's interrupted, and the cinema manager walks forward to groans and boos from the crowd. He silences them all by saying, "Eva Peron entered immortality tonight." Then we have scenes of the audience sobbing, distraught, upset, clearly moved by this bad news. And it's here that we meet for the first time our narrator character, Shay, played by Antonio Banderas, and he's conspicuously not crying.
The movie then cuts to a sepia shot of a funeral procession following a horse-drawn hearse, and we are told that this is Chivilcoy back in 1926. A van pulls up on a dusty road and a family in mourning clothes climb out. They approach a church, but they're turned away by the family who we saw at the beginning following the hearse. The mother of the van-riding family says, "He was the father of my children too," and is told, "Your children are bastards." We see a young Eva run into the church to kiss the forehead of the dead man, clearly her father, but is dragged screaming from the church.
Then we see jump forward in time to a more recent funeral procession passing through the streets of Buenos Aires with a huge crowd, not the stragglers that we saw in the earlier funeral scene. The military parade, massive banners bearing Eva Peron's likeness, and then we cut to inside a bar where our narrator Shay is sitting alone and starts to sing.
Oh, what a circus, oh, what a show. Argentina has gone to town over the death of an actress called Eva Peron. We've all gone crazy, mourning all day and mourning all night, falling over ourselves to get all of the misery right.
During that song, we get to see clips of the funeral where we see an adult Eva Peron, played by Madonna, speaking to adoring crowds, interspersed with shots of police brutality, riots and violence. The music then segues into a mournful choral lament before cutting back to our sepia-toned 1926 funeral and a tearful young Eva being led away by her mother.
Yeah, I mean, those clips, obviously, from Eva Peron's life and the funeral itself, going back to the other funeral, we were just saying off air there that I guess the stage music, which I've never seen,
No, me neither.
would find it very difficult to do time jumps like that.
And scene changes so seamlessly, so I'm not sure, but someone can perhaps let us know if they've seen the stage production.
Yeah.
So let's set the scene and
yeah.
How did that first introductions go?
Well, Maria Eva Duarte was born in 1919 in the small town of Los Toldos. She was the illegitimate daughter of a middle-class landowner, Juan Duarte, and he kept Eva's mother, Juana Ibarragan, as a mistress as well as his own wife and children. So technically her name should have been Maria Eva Ibarragan, but she always referred to herself as Duarte.
Yeah, and the movie shows, as often the case in biopics, it starts at its eventual conclusion with the death of our protagonist, Eva Peron. The reaction of the cinema audience does seem to have been accurately portrayed. She was well loved by much of the public at the time, and whatever one thinks of her political views or her personal motivation, she was a beacon for Argentinians, either of hope for what she could do for them, or for the less convinced, an example of what could be possible for a low-born person rising to the highest ranks of Argentinian society.
Yeah, the scene with going back to the funeral of her father, it's pretty well described scene. The young Eva, she was 6 years old at the time of her father's death, and her family, they were turned away from the funeral and scorned by his legitimate family. The movie doesn't really examine Eva's upbringing at all, and her mother is barely seen apart from these couple of opening scenes, but she did remain quite a strong presence in Eva's life. She was a seamstress, so her children were as well dressed, and she kept a firm but caring hand on her children. She seems to have been a good mother, although they all had the stigmatism of illegitimacy.
Yeah, and she had, I think there were 3 children in the family, so
at least.
Juan Duarte had a long-term relationship. I think he was a traveller and would come 6 months of the year to one family and 6 months with the other, and had multiple children to Juana.
And as will become significant later, he was a middle-class landowner. Eva's brother, Juan,
he rose to some prominence, didn't he?
He was part of their administration later.
He was assistant of
Juan Peron.
Juan Peron, wasn't he?
Yeah, he doesn't really appear in this. He was a soap salesman, I think, initially.
Oh, well, there you go.
The funeral itself, the real funeral, is said to have been attended by somewhere between 2.2 and 2.5 million people, which is just incredible. And that puts it firmly in the top 10 attended funerals in known history. Interestingly, our next episode is Lincoln. His funeral was attended by 7 million.
Wow.
Which I think is the second highest. And we're immediately confronted with Che's disparaging attitude towards Evita, which continues throughout the movie. The line in Oh What a Circus of "She's done nothing for years" is a bit harsh, considering she only met Juan Peron in 1944 and she was dead 8 years later. He sings about the Casa Rosada as well, which is translated as the Pink House, and it's the Argentine equivalent of Buckingham House, if you look,
the White
Buckingham
House.
Palace, or the White. Well, yeah, more the White House. It's the seat, the residence of the Argentinian president. And probably just worth mentioning, we had a discussion and had to go and do a bit of research about Antonio Banderas. He won a Tony
for a
different musical, but yeah, that boy can really sing.
Yeah.
So if anyone's thinking, is that really him singing? Yes, it is. And
is.
on YouTube, you can find him performing Oh What a Circus live at the Royal Albert Hall. And wow, he's got a good voice. It's not fair.
That's
he's got
great.
Too many talents.
So back to the movie?
Back to the movie.
In the action of the movie, now we meet Augustin Magaldi, played by Jimmy Nail, who is woken up and leaps out of bed, in which we see a dark-haired Eva Duarte at this stage, Madonna, smiling as he dresses and descends some stairs. We meet our narrator Shay, who's everywhere in the movie. He's there again and describes how Augustin has the distinction of being the first man to be of use to Eva Duarte. We then hear Augustin sing a tango, Night of 1,000 Stars, as an appreciative audience gazes up at him.
Clearly, Eva is attaching herself to this guy, and she's trying to get him to take us to Buenos Aires.
Yeah.
And in the next scene, we see her singing about Buenos Aires, and there's a medley as he, either through trying to put her off because he's concerned for her welfare, or to try and get rid of her because she's just a rural, 15-year-old girl at this stage. He sings a medley with her, and his side is Beware of the City, and we've got a little clip here.
I wanna be a part of Buenos Aires, Big Apple.
Eva, beware of the city. It's hungry and cold, can't be controlled, it is mad. Those who are fools are swallowed up whole and those who are not become what they should not become changed.
And elsewhere in that song, Shag joins in with quite funny, cynical quips and comments. Eva, however, shows her strength of character as despite all Magaldi's protests, she forces her way into his company, heads for the capital on the train, and she also, we find out that she despises the middle classes. So, did they get any of that right?
Well, the character Magaldi, he was real and a popular Argentinian singer at the time, and he certainly toured extensively throughout the country. But there is no record of him performing in Eva's town, and when he did tour, he was accompanied by his wife. So it's unlikely he would have been able to carry on an affair with a 15-year-old girl. Although there is little corroborated information about Eva's early life, the likeliest way that she got to Buenos Aires was with her mother, the version that Eva herself told of her arrival in the hopes of becoming an actor. She did hate the middle classes, and it's a theme that ran through her life, probably initiated by her treatment at the hands of her father's legitimate family. Incidentally, there are places in the movie where speech is really required, but the producers decided to have only singing, apart from one or two instances when this can be quite strange. One example is during the Beware of the City Buenos Aires medley, where Evita sings "Screw the middle classes."
Yeah, we've discussed this. We both found this quite irritating. It's like, just have dialogue.
Yeah.
They do use it in there's only 2 or 3 instances. The cinema manager at the beginning, and as we'll get to after Juan Perón's arrest, the president at the time says, "Release him." It's like 2 words. He speaks it rather than sing it. But this is
over the top.
Yeah,
it's too much singing. Like the only other musical we've done is Sound of Music, and that had lovely, memorable songs, but it was interspersed with significant pieces of dialogue. They did not have to sing every little development, which is what this movie does.
Yeah.
It really sort of is overkill, in my opinion.
So here you go, folks. What do you guys think?
Screw the middle classes, I will never accept them. My father's other family were middle class, and we were kept out of sight.
Yeah, that's pretty bad. And that happens quite a lot.
Yeah,
and some of the songs that could be good songs, they kind of cram words in that don't really scan. But okay, back to the movie.
We're in the movie. We arrive in Buenos Aires on a train, then a bus, with Magaldi looking resigned as Eva sings her way excitedly through the streets and bars, and we see people dancing to Latin tunes. They arrive late at night in an apartment. Eva from below watches as Magaldi climbs the stairs to be greeted by his children and wife. Turning away, Eva sings "Another Suitcase in Another Hall," reflecting some sadness but also a cynical acceptance.
Yeah, now this song, interestingly, wasn't sung by her in the stage musical, but here it is, and it's quite a lovely song, so we're just going to play you a little clip of this.
Being used to trouble, I anticipated, but all the same I hate it, wouldn't you? So what happens now? So what happens now? Where am I going to? Where am I going to?
This sort of sadness, but also cynical acceptance of her lot with that song, and it finishes with her drinking alone in a bar, and there's a little duet with Che, who's now a barman, as Eva asks herself, "Where am I going to?" both literally and metaphorically, I guess. We see Eva being interviewed from amongst many other women as the song continues. She seems to accept her fate to be used by men until she finds what she's looking for, but she is approached by a photographer. And as the song ends, we see the photographer, he's undressing in front of Eva, suggesting that it's a quid pro quo arrangement, and then she's being photographed in various costumes and striking theatrical poses. And we see her out in the streets, at a newsstand, and she sees her likeness in magazines. And then suddenly she's on the arm of a successful-looking man sweeping past the mournful-looking photographer, who was then sung to by Che, who's now a cleaner, and Eva as they duet on another song we've got a little clip from, because it is quite funny, and it's basically illustrates the movie's take on how she was climbing her way to the top of the social ladder. And this is Good Night and Thank You.
Good night and thank you, Senor Jabón. We are grateful you found her a spot on the sound radio. We'll think of you every time she's on the air. We'll love you to stay, but you'd be in the way. So do up your trousers and go. There is no one at all. Never has been and never will be a lover, male or female, who hasn't an iron. In fact, they rely on tricks they can try on their partner. They're hoping their lover will help them or keep them, support them, promote them, don't blame them. You're the same.
So let's do a reality check on all those scenes. The whole sequence of scenes and the haunting song Another Suitcase in Another Hall, as Martin suggested, in the stage play wasn't sung by Evita's character, but it was actually sung by Juan Peron's previous mistress prior to Evita, and at this stage we haven't met Juan Peron, so they changed things around a little bit, but they do return to Peron's previous mistress and that song, Another Suitcase in Another Hall, later in the movie. The movie shows Eva having herself sing the song. It could be said that it's being used to create sympathy for her and to justify the subsequent steps that we see her take to initially survive in Buenos Aires and eventually flourish. However, there is very little evidence that Eva used her body as blatantly to climb the social and career ladders as the movie suggests. There is a lot of talk out there that she did sleep her way to the top and used her body, but that was probably by her disparaging comments by her rivals, the middle class, the upper class, that so rejected her when she did rise to power.
Yeah. And I mean, she did get bit parts initially on radio. Radio was the big medium
breakthrough for her.
She was a huge fan of Hollywood movies, and she'd go to the cinema and watch them and study how the actresses behaved. And she gradually did get bigger and bigger roles, and she did well roles. Before she met Juan Peron.
She had a couple of movie roles, I think, before she met Juan.
Yeah.
Minor.
Okay, back to the movie, and the song is continuing as Eva is now with a military officer. Shay thanks the previous lover for getting Eva a place on the radio. That's the clip we heard. There's now quite a male chorus of former partners as Eva's having dinner with her army officer, and then the next scenes show from her having dinner in a posh restaurant to rioters being brutally put down by police and soldiers. Che sings The Lady's Got Potential and tells us that there has been a military coup, and
then another coup.
Then another coup as the new military leaders are replaced by more new military leaders. And it's quite funny. You have balcony scenes. It's very well shot, this bit, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
You have balcony scenes at the Casa Rosada where president after president appears, but behind them, in the background, edging ever closer to the front, is Colonel then, as he was then, Colonel Juan Peron, played by Jonathan Pryce, to whom Che introduces us, immediately mentioning that he'd spent time in Italy observing Benito Mussolini's fascist regime.
We then see Peron meeting some workers in factories and more riots that are being brutally suppressed. Then at an earthquake site in Argentina, we see Peron pressing the flesh and being applauded by the masses. We jump to 1944 and we see the first meeting between Peron and Eva Duarte, while Agustin Magaldi again reprises his song Night of a Thousand Stars at a charity function that Peron had raised in relief of the earthquake victims. Shall we move on? Yeah. Shay we now see as the MC of that earthquake relief event, and as Augustin leaves the stage, Eva sings to him, "Your act hasn't changed much." Seeing the senior military officers beside her, he replies, "Neither has yours." Peron takes the stage and tells the audience that he is one of them and stands for the people. We see Shay sing The Art of the Possible as Peron meets Eva and sing to each other that they're just a simple soldier / actor, respectively.
Yeah.
That was particularly clunky. I remember someone sings, it must be Shay, he sings, "It was January 22nd, 19 blah blah blah, yeah, and they first met," and yeah, right, but we could have gotten that. We didn't need to have that shoved in our face via a song.
No. So wrapping that lot up, going back to the good night and thank you, I thought there, the line, there's no one, no lover that doesn't rely on tricks they can pull on their partner, is a very cynical take, but again to reflect the fact that Eva was using anyone she could get, progressively wealthier and more influential lovers. The period 1930-1943 was known as the infamous decade in Argentina. It was a succession of corrupt governments that were indeed brought to a close in June 1943 by a military coup which raised General Arturo Rawson to the presidency. They then promptly deselected him 3 days later, and this is the balcony scene where we see this
succession
conveyor
of
belt of presidents. Yeah, he was then replaced by Pedro Ramirez, who lasted for nearly a year. Then he was succeeded by Edelmiro Farrell. Now he made it all the way to June 1946, the third anniversary of the original military coup, when after 3 elections that Farrell realised were essential to stave off civil war, he was beaten by Colonel Juan Peron, the former Labour minister. And the clips we saw of Peron meeting union workers and people at earthquake sites, that was in his capacity as Labour minister.
And it's quite accurate, isn't it? I mean, he did become a popular figure with the working classes through that role as Labour minister. And he really did organise a charity event in relief of the earthquake victims.
He did, and it's almost certain that that's where he first met Eva Peron. He had served at the embassy in Rome during Mussolini's dictatorship. Peron said he liked many of Mussolini's policies, but he said he made some big mistakes. I saw these, so I won't make them. And this is probably partly the root of the fascist label that's often applied to Juan Peron.
Which the movie does emphasise. I mean, they accurately portray the troops as wearing sort of Nazi-style
surplus German helmets,
Yeah, but I think they were. That's fairly accurate.
They had close ties with Germany, and they
even
would have
after the war.
bought weapons, before and after.
Yeah.
Although during the war they kind of had to cut them to be readmitted to the world community.
Yeah, I think did they finally declare war against
Germany?
They
did. About 2 months before the surrender. The charity event, as we said, is almost certainly where Juan Peron met Eva Duarte. However, Agustin Magaldi couldn't have sung there because he died 6 years earlier of peritonitis. But the mutual attraction between Juan and Eva appears to have been instant and strong and quite genuine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Back to the movie. Then we see Eva goes on to tell Peron that in a song that, quote, "I'd be good for you," as they leave together in Peron's car. Clearly smitten, Peron and Eva end up in a bedroom as he sings that he'd be good for her too. Next we hear "Thank You and Goodbye" again as Eva and Juan Peron arrive at his house. Finding a young girl in his bed, played by Andrea Corr, Madonna sings to her that "I've just unemployed you," and tells her to pack up and get out. The mistress reprises the "Another Suitcase in Another Hall" song before leaving. Next, at a polo club, we see Argentinian aristocracy sit around and staring and in many cases sneering at Eva and Peron as he introduces her to the other members of this upper class set. Shay, our narrator, now smartly dressed, sings Peron's latest mistress song as the chorus of army officers are very disparaging about Eva.
Should you wish to cause great distress in the tidiest officer's mess, just mention her name.
That isn't funny. Don't cry for officers to do as they please, as long as they're discreet and keep clear on their seats. We know we disregard, but once they allow a bit on the side to move to the center when she's not qualified, we are forced to mark his card. She should get into her head. She should not get out of bed. She should know that she's not paid to be loved or to be late. Slut!
I found that song, I was amazed they used slut and bitch for the army officers, the army chorus referring to Eva. And there's a bit where they say, there's no problem with an officer having a bit on the side provided he's discreet and remains clear of disease.
Nice touch.
Like, oh, that's a bit
Confronting?
but probably quite accurately portraying their attitude to her.
Yes.
You know, it's not acceptable when the bit on the side moves to the centre where she's not qualified, sort of summed it up. And then the song continues with the soldiers glaring at Eva attending public events. The people, however, are clearly falling for her.
We see Peron sing a duo with Eva. He's showing his awareness that, quote, the knives are out with potential presidents all about, unquote, but Eva urges him to push for power. He contemplates exile, but Eva points out that the unions are on Peron's side, having been the popular Minister of Labour. They discuss the problem in song, and a military guard arrives and we realise that Peron is being arrested. A series of scenes show newspapers blaring "The People for Peron" as the rural population rallies for his support. We see Eva making radio broadcasts appealing to the working class to mobilise, as Peron loves them. This is all to the song "A New Argentina" in the movie, as Eva speaks to rallies, praising Peron as the crowds swell into Buenos Aires.
Yeah, we see Peron in his prison cell being visited by Eva. He still appears reluctant to grasp for power, but again she drives him on, and you very much get the impression that he's actually her puppet.
Yeah, she's Lady Macbeth in a way.
She's the engine behind the drive. Now the crowds are chanting Eva, and again we see her haranguing the crowd, asking if Peron didn't love the people, how could he possibly love her, a reference to her lowly background. And then we see a grim senior officer, possibly the President Farrell at the time. He actually speaks for once and says, "Release him." And we see Peron and Eva reunited in front of cheering crowds. And he does a thing that it becomes a bit of a meme for him, where he removes his jacket and throws it away.
Like rolling his sleeves up,
yeah,
man
and
of the
saying,
people or something.
"Look at me, I'm just in my shirt sleeves, I'm one of you."
Still got my tie and my hair perfectly coiffed, but I'm one of you.
And then the next scene shows the couple getting married in a church, and among the congratulating crowd is Che, saying that the Peronists and their Labour Party will use whatever methods they need to establish authority. And then, of course, we see following scenes of mob violence and intimidation being their main tactic. And then a huge torch-bearing crowd advance, waving Peron banners and still singing "A New Argentina."
Well, let's do a reality check on all of that.
Yeah. It does seem to have taken a while before Juan Peron realised that his fascinated attraction to Eva Duarte, as she was then, was actually much more than just entertainment. He started to realise she was a very intelligent, aware and ambitious ally. The qualities that made her so attractive to him would have very practical applications. All the biographies we've studied agree that the musical's depiction of Peron as weak and indecisive and largely led by the ferociously ambitious Eva are entirely false. She would become hugely important to him and a great asset at home and abroad, but she always followed his lead and she always subordinated herself to him and his policies. And
not the other way around.
She might have, I'm sure she influenced him, but she certainly didn't command him.
The portrayal of Peron's military colleagues in the movie is fairly accurate. They either resented her growing influence, or they just thought that he was being led by his baser instincts and therefore showing a lack of decorum, discretion and plain common sense in falling for this commoner. Peron had been made Minister for Labour, as we've already said, under the presidency of General Farrell, thank you, who had been Peron's commanding officer in the army. The previously insignificant Labour ministry was transformed under Peron, bringing a swathe of reforms to improve working conditions, pay and rights of the workers. These included an effective minimum wage and what is known as aguinaldo, literally bonus, where a worker received an annual bonus of 1 month's wage each year.
Well, we have that here in Qatar, don't we? We have the 13 months.
Well, I know some cultures do. I know Germany, I think, to this day does. When you take your 1 month's leave, you get another month bonus on top of that. So it's a common thing around the world. When he's called on to settle an industrial dispute, he usually found in favour of the unions. That's where the groundswell of support for Peron really began to gain momentum.
As a result of his surging popularity, his political colleagues / rivals, obviously some would have grown jealous and wary. He was forced to resign, which to his credit he agreed to prevent civil unrest or even civil war, on the 9th of October 1945. On the 13th of October he was then arrested. Huge demonstrations against this, which were influenced, if not actually organised by Eva Duarte, ensued, and persuaded that they'd basically stirred the hornet's nest. The government decided 4 days later that he should be released. In a public show of gratitude and mutual loyalty, they were married on the 22nd of October. What the eventual outcome the president intended for Peron, who had been a close and respected subordinate of General Farrell's.
But
We
clearly
don't know.
a threat.
It does appear that Farrell felt he was forced into having to have him arrested.
The movie shows a fairly public, prominent church wedding, but apparently they went to some small town away from the beaten track, and it was pretty much a secret little event. That was
Like
a
registry office wedding, yeah.
Yeah, it was
And
a church wedding, but it was probably the Catholic Church's equivalent of a registry wedding.
Yeah.
And apparently she, on the wedding marriage certificate, she added... Oh no, she reduced her age by 3 years, which crucially meant she was somehow more legitimate because it was something around the death of her original father.
Yeah.
She falsified her date of birth to imply that she wasn't illegitimate somehow. I don't know the details.
And that the public information of her illegitimacy wouldn't break for a couple more years.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's certainly something I think she feared. And we've got to think this is 1940s.
In a conservative
very
Catholic country.
Conservative Catholic country where illegitimacy had a massive stigma. Peron announced his candidacy for the presidency the day after his release from prison on a Labour Party ticket, and during Peron's presidencies from then on, 17th of October will become known as Loyalty Day. The opposition to him was quite disparate, from communists who feared his supposed fascist leanings to the conservatives who feared the fact that he kept suggesting wealth redistribution and equality.
Yeah, the Peron party, from what you can see, it's a bit of an odd beast. You can't pigeonhole it as left-wing, right-wing or centrist, because he came to power with the help of the unions, typically left-wing, but he was very authoritarian, he admired Mussolini, and he's had very fascist leanings as well. So it's an odd hybrid, but I guess it worked for him and it won him power for some time.
I mean, I'm no political expert and I don't want to jump on the pigeonholing bandwagon, but it's almost like nationalism combined with socialism, which could be national socialism, which would make him
just
a Nazi.
had a bad track record, hadn't it?
I think also the label fascist in the mid to late 40s on the back of the war had such negative connotations. It was an easy label to throw at anybody if you wanted to basically discredit them.
Okay, so back to the movie.
Yeah.
In the movie, we see the balcony of the Casa Rosada, the presidential house. We see Peron again removing his jacket, and he calls, "We are all workers now," as he celebrates his electoral victory. He then moves inside to his waiting entourage as the crowd starts to call out for Evita. Peron leads her onto the balcony, where we hear her sing about her need for the people's love despite all I have done. She then starts to justify her change from poor rural girl to the president's wife, before launching into Don't Cry For Me, Argentina.
Although it's not quite clear why the Argentines would want to cry for it just yet. But we know you've all been waiting for it, so here it is.
Don't cry for me, Argentina. The truth is I never left you. All through my wild days, my mad existence, I kept my promise. Don't keep your distance.
In the crowd, we see a belligerent-looking Che before we see scenes of Evita touring the country by train, then cutting back to the balcony as Eva dashes back inside, delighted with the reception. An unimpressed-looking elder politician says, "There's more to leadership than entertaining peasants," and I think it's Eva's sister or one of her crowds turns and says, "Is that right?" Or, "So you think," or something like that. And then Eva returns to the crowd, telling them that they are the descamisados, the shirtless ones, that they'll take riches from the oligarchs and give them to the people, and they are her descamisados. And that's a phrase that she uses a few times in the movie. Then we cut to a group of aristocrats looking very unimpressed, and then to Peron later that night, dressed only in a nightgown. He goes down and knocks on Eva's bedroom door. She's brushing her hair, and she ignores him, and he sort of quietly shuffles away.
What's that scene all about, I wonder? Saying that she's got the power?
Yeah, I think so. That she's pretty much emasculated him, and she responds to him when she wants to. So
reality check.
Yeah.
So we've had the celebration after the successful election, and Peron is the nation's leader, right?
Yeah. I mean, his campaign, there was a lot of, he had an ambition of renationalising foreign-owned businesses, which we've seen more recently in Argentina.
Yeah.
And of course, the latest administrations there have identified themselves as Peronists.
No, I didn't know
So Christine Kirchner definitely was very much yes, I'm cut from the Peronist cloth.
I thought that there was Macri, someone called Macri that was president now.
He is now, yeah.
Right.
But there's been a lot of that is a Peronist
party
policy,
right?
To renationalise, to basically protect the Argentinian interests first, quite understandably. At the time, the US ambassador, most of the foreign-owned businesses in Argentina were British and American. The US ambassador, Sproul Braden, made speeches in favour of the Union Group or the United Group of anti-Peronist parties. But that kind of backfired because Peron was able to say to the Argentinian electorate that they're choosing between Peron and Braden. In other words, you're choosing between me and a puppet of the Americans. I mean, Braden himself is a character worth examining, but we don't have time to go into him now. But yeah.
We see Peron, in reality, was elected with a clear, if not a sweeping majority. He had around 11% advantage over his opposition. The use of the term descamisados, or shirtless ones, is played down in the movie, whereas Eva Peron in reality used it frequently as a rallying call for the masses. She'd been one of them and remained so in her heart. It became a label akin to the sans culottes, those without underwear, for revolutionary Paris. The final scene of this segment, the continued emasculation of Juan by his new wife, his fictional obsession with the musical and movie to make Eva the dominant character in their relationship.
Yeah.
Not true.
Next we see a magnificently dressed Evita on Peron's, and we'll probably use those titles for her interchangeably, Eva and Evita, because she had started. Evita is just means little Eva, diminutive and affectionate term for Eva. And it's what the crowd labelled her, and she did like it, apparently. But we see her on Peron's uniformed arm at a very posh reception, and a tuxedo Che launches into, I think it's a lovely song, but it's got some interesting parts. High Flying Adored, which I'm not actually sure is a grammatically correct sentence in English, but here's a clip.
A cross between a fantasy of the bedroom and a saint. Just a backstreet girl, hustling and fighting, scratching and biting, high flying adored. Did you believe in your wildest moments all this would be yours? That you'd become the lady of them all? Were the stars in your eyes when you crawled in at night? From the bars, from the sidewalks, from the gutter theatrical. Don't look down, it's a long, long way to fall.
So, the Don't Look Down, it's a long, long way to fall, and describing as a backstreet girl hustling and fighting, again just reinforces this impression the movie's trying to give us that she was, scrabbling away to the top. She replies within the song saying, yeah, I hear what you say, but she admits she got lucky, and she says, yeah, there was a gap that needed filling, but she then asserts that no one can fill it quite like she can. I think that's probably quite true.
Yeah. And then there's a song by Eva, Rainbow High, where we see her being dressed, jewelled and made up in an array of expensive clothes and trinkets. The people need to adore me, so don't Christian Dior me, she says.
So Christian Dior me.
So Christian Dior me.
Yeah.
And goes on to say that her descamisados expected to outshine their enemies, so she won't disappoint them as, quote, I am their saviour.
Yeah, there's an interesting line in that song. We're not going to play a clip of it, but it shows her being dressed, her hair being coiffured and jewellery being put on her. And then she says, they need to something or other me, so Machiavelli me. And I'm thinking, well, Machiavelli wasn't a costume designer or a jewellery designer. He was he wrote The Prince, which is a very cynical realpolitik guide. So again, you're getting this thing of...
She's Machiavellian, she's Lady Macbeth.
Exactly, yes. Yeah. And then at the end of that series of clips, we see newsreel footage showing Eva heading to Europe, flying to Spain to be greeted by General Franco and adoring crowds.
Okay, so she's on the ascendancy and she's on her way to Europe. Let's do a reality check then, shall we?
Yeah.
There's a line in the song High Flying Adored about Evita being a cross between a fantasy of the bedroom and a saint, again reinforcing the movie's urge that we view her as a ruthlessly ambitious woman who'll do anything to get what she wants. Although we're criticising the movie in turn, they do somewhat redeem themselves by giving Eva the comeback that she acknowledges she's been lucky, been in the right place at the right time to fill the gaps, and no one can fill it like she does. The gap that she's meant to fill isn't quite explained, as there'd never been a woman like her in Latin American politics, certainly not in recent memory. Eva Peron virtually created the role for herself, and even now, exactly what that role was and what it achieved is still being debated, nowhere more than Argentina itself.
Yeah, Rainbow High is a pretty demeaning song intended to set the seal on Evita's ambitions being pursued for self-gratification, either material or egotistical, which again brings into light the casting of Madonna, possibly fitting this ambition they had to paint Evita in a certain way. Let's face it, Madonna sang a song called Material Girl.
Yeah.
Those parallels. Completely ignored by the movie or musical is Lilian Guardo, who was a friend of Eva's, and she was quite a upper-class lady, or certainly she was her advisor before and during the European tour on costumes and hairdos, and some sources I read credited her with Evita's style changing when she got back from Europe to more conservative and understated dress and the severe hair bun that we associate with her with, instead of these big piled up movie star hairdos.
So it was true, she did fall for the glitz and glamour of the outfits and the jewels and everything, and she, as you've just said, she actually did realise that might have been a mistake and went much more conservative dress when she was dealing with the people after this trip to Europe.
And it is possible, we have to say, that all her ambitions were for self-gratification. I'm not saying they weren't. I think we're trying to present a balanced counterpoint to the movie's pretty over-the-top
demonisation,
anti-Eva propaganda. Yeah.
Okay, shall we go back to the movie?
Yeah.
We see scenes in the movie now of what they're calling the Rainbow Tour. This started in Spain.
It's like a private newsreel viewing of Juan Perón, 3 or 4 advisors, and I think Che is the projectionist.
Yeah,
so that's how he gets in there.
So they're commenting on the newsreel footage of her successful trip to Europe. Originally, I think Franco asked Perón to come to...
Well, that's reality. Should we go through the scenes first?
Okay. So, as you say, we see Shay telling us that Evita filled the bullring with 45,000 people. But if you're prettier than Franco, that's not hard. That's very disparaging of a big crowd like that.
Yeah.
We see Perón's advisors in the cinema, the private cinema, pitch in telling him what an asset Evita is proving and what a success the tour is proving as well. Perón gloats that the whole world adores her. But Shay retorts that in Italy it wasn't quite as good, as anti-fascist crowds booed and pelted her. In a funny little scene...
That's
pelting?
quite funny. No, she
scene.
says to an elderly, I think he's probably the Argentinian ambassador or something, in Rome, and she says to him, "They called me a whore." And he says, "Oh, that's an easy mistake to make. They still call me an admiral. Yeah, I gave up the sea years ago." And Madonna actually does a really good little quirky double take look before the scene cuts to the next bit. But she then meets the Pope, and Shay points out that Evita only received a rosary and a word, not a papal decoration. The success is now being described as qualified. In France, she came close to winning the same reception in Spain, but Evita starts to look tired. And then Shay tells us, she's not even going to England, and Perón's advisor says, it wasn't on the schedule anyway. So the Rainbow Tour. Let's
check on that.
Yeah. As you were quite rightly started to say, the origins appear to have been General Franco inviting Juan Perón to visit Spain and meet Franco and President Salazar of Portugal. But as Argentina had only recently been readmitted to the world community, as after being seen as too soft on the fascist Axis powers, that was seen as a bad idea. Franco and Salazar being very closely associated with Nazi Germany. And
I think Spain was dirt poor at this stage and was really looking for some trading links with the Spanish-speaking nations, and they went all out to try and woo
France
Argentina.
as well. France wanted Argentinian grain and beef. Now, Eva either decided or was persuaded, depending on which opinion you believe, and the Fraser Navarro biography I read, which is very well researched and very balanced, they said she might have decided, she might have been persuaded, we don't know.
But either way, she went to Spain as a
Different
representative.
inner circle people have told different versions.
Yeah,
but she went.
And Spain did love her. She had huge crowds.
Absolutely.
They went bonkers.
They absolutely adored her. Italy, not so much, although it wasn't completely hostile, but it's particularly in Rome there were demonstrations against her.
She was looking forward to meeting the Pope, and the Pope did meet her, but apparently it didn't go anywhere near as well as she thought it would go.
Well, he gave her allocated her the same amount of time he did to heads of state, and she was given a rosary.
Yeah.
Apparently it would have been quite unusual for him to have presented her with a papal medal.
Because she's not the head of state.
Yeah.
Anyway.
France was generally welcoming, but she did start to complain of fatigue at that stage. She never made it to Britain. George VI had said he would not meet her, and although Eva would have been happy to meet the Queen, of course this is the lady we came to know in our generation as the Queen Mother, where Eva changed her itinerary and tried to move the England visit further back, but that would have clashed with the Queen's habitual summer retreat to Balmoral in Scotland. Not quite sure why she couldn't have gone there. So there was a bit of a clash of wills. All this is going on behind the scenes. But Eva eventually refused to go to the UK, but the public thing was she's exhausted, she needs to go home, and as the advisor in the movie says, well, it wasn't on the schedule anyway, because it was never formally announced. And Che mocks her for the papal meeting. It doesn't even mention Switzerland, which I find surprising in the movie, because she goes to Switzerland. Well, it doesn't mention it specifically, and stones and tomatoes were thrown at her car. The stone thrower was arrested, and he proved to be a man with a history of mental health issues, so I'm not sure that should be taken as a national disapproval of her. But this is quite funny. The anti-Peronists spread a rumour that the entire tour was a cover to deposit money in a Swiss bank account that Eva and Juan had stolen from the Argentinian treasury. Fraser and Navarro say, if you want to do that, there's much less conspicuous ways of carrying it out. And there's never been any evidence that the Perons ever had such an account, although plenty of wealthy Argentinians did.
And it's around about now that she gets on the world's radar, and Time magazine features Eva on its cover in 1947. And
that was the first time a sole woman appeared on the front of Time magazine.
Really?
Yeah, without her husband or a group.
Right, and that same article is, I think you've already mentioned, it's the first time that her illegitimacy was revealed to the world's public.
Yeah.
So pretty scandalous, I guess, back home in Argentina.
So back we go to the movie, and we see more clips of protests and arrests, and then some upper-class women sing about how the worm has turned as Evita arrives at the British Embassy, a British Embassy event back in Argentina, and she's singing to the assembled aristocrats. She won't join their club, even though they should have asked her anyway. She says she won't help the poor once a month at their tombolas. She'll take control and sweep them away. Che responds that whilst her sentiments sound noble, little has changed amongst the poor, but then Evita defiantly comes back and says everything will be done by my foundation. And then Che breaks into a song with the money keeps rolling in, and he's implying that Eva's prime concern is Eva, and whilst some of the money does roll out to the poor and needy, some of it's being skimmed off, and he says no, when the money keeps rolling in and then rolling out, no one's keeping count.
Okay, so now in reality, the decision for Eva to not be involved with an existing charity and to form her own charity, that's pretty big news in real life, isn't it?
Yeah, there was the Sociedad de Beneficencia charity group, and it was aristocratic group of ladies, and traditionally the First Lady was elected to president, but these rather posh ladies had declined such an invitation to Eva.
She responded by forming her own foundation, named after her, and although it may not have been in direct retaliation for the snub that the ladies had given her, government funds that previously went to the Sociedad now went to the Eva Peron Foundation. The foundation ended up employing 14,000 people, paid scholarships for bright but disadvantaged children, distributed clothing, food, daily essentials, cooking utensils, pots and pans, built schools, churches, hospitals, and even a settlement. Evita city, some 20 kilometres from Buenos Aires, today has a population of some 70,000 people. For the first time, Argentina also had a universal healthcare system at pretty much the same time as Britain launched its much vaunted NHS. So the movie portrays that pretty correctly. We see her handing out food and getting adulation from the working class people.
Yeah.
A very clever move on her part. In reality, she got government money to hand out as she saw fit.
Yep.
And she grew huge patronage from this. And there are people this very day living in Evita city that credit her with giving them a good quality of life all these years later.
Absolutely, yeah. And for whatever her motivation was, I guess if you're one of those people receiving cooking pots, pans, food and clothes, you're a bit like Bob Geldof at Live Aid when someone said, "Are you worried about the motivation of some of these bands just seeking publicity?" He said, "I don't care what their motivation is, because people pay tickets to pay money to see them, and therefore we get money." So, yeah.
Okay, so back to the movie. We see the political campaign rolling on. Evita is preaching the gospel of Peron as the party of both the workers and of women. Among yet another adoring crowd, we see our narrator Shay tell us that Evita now wants to be vice president, something that the army's male chorus decide is out of the question. We see Peron at his desk, and he says that while he understands the reluctance, the people love Evita and that she's the most important thing. While they sit around and talked about it, she was out there doing it, getting back to business and getting the English out of Argentina.
Yeah, the they there refers to his cabinet. Sat around and they're all saying, "Oh no, she can't." No, and he said, "Hang on, whilst we the collective we were sitting around talking, she's been out there and doing it." A chorus sings Santa Evita to the tune of Don't Cry For Me, Argentina, which appears again and again in lots of different songs, as we see more violence, bombs detonating and near riots in Parliament. And then the newspaper offices are raided as men line up for work, and we see the spinning newspaper headlines saying gold reserves at an all-time low.
We see Evita being told now by our narrator Shay, "Oh, just turn a blind eye," as she arrives at a church to be greeted by a child's choir. We see more riots, mounted police beating protesters, and it's intercut with Eva being given the sacrament before dramatically collapsing. We see a wounded and beaten narrator, Shay, lying.
Yeah, he's obviously been part of one of these riots, and he's been clubbed by
one of the policemen.
Yeah, mounted police.
He tries to get up and run away. As we see Evita being carried to hospital. "Why try and govern a country when you can become a saint?" he rhetorically asks her. We see Evita then in an operating theatre, and Shay performs the waltz of Eva and Shay as he asks her why she has done the things she has done. To which she replies, "Before you get on your high horse, all I have done is for my descamisados. Yet admits, if I played by the rules, what are my chances?" Collapsing, Eva asks, "What is the good of the strongest heart in a body that keeps falling apart?" As we see Shay retreat into the darkness around the stage.
Yeah, I mean, this is almost like her spirit is with him. Because her body is actually on an operating theatre and she's clearly very ill. So
quite a dramatic series of scenes.
Yeah, I mean, the political campaign thing, she founded the Female Peronist Party, brought many Argentinian women into politics for the first time, and while she can't be credited with bringing about the female vote, she certainly was a driving force behind it. And when the law was passed in 1947, Juan Peron, to the adulation of the crowd and the delight of the crowd on the balcony at Casa Rosada, handed the physical bill that he just signed to Eva, giving her sort of share of the credit and ownership of it. Her female party swelled the ranks of Peron supporters, leading to his re-election in 1951 with a larger majority. He got some 63% of the vote, over 30% more than the next largest party, and it was effectively a licence to pass what bills and laws he wished.
The scenes that show a deteriorating Argentina into chaos, while Eva continues to behave like a queen. So it's true that the economic situation, which in Peron's first government had dramatically improved due to his reforms, by the time of his second term, which the movie is now portraying, things had started to decline dramatically. This is largely due to factors outside Peron's control, though. The Marshall Plan, where US dollars were lent to struggling European countries post-World War II so that they could rebuild, had clauses that stipulated that those very US dollars were only to buy US goods, whether industrial equipment or food. With Argentina's main export being beef and grain, the Marshall Plan hit their economy hard. Peron was willing to use physical intimidation on protesters for sure, but his main tactic was to close down media. That was hostile and a way depriving his opposition of a voice, which they do mention in the movie.
Yeah. Okay, back to the movie, and we see Peron next to Eva's bed, accepting that she's dying, but almost pleading with her, don't go yet. She seems scared, but still determined to do what she can. And the next song is the
Oscar award-winning?
Yeah, the Oscar-winning song, You Must Love Me. So we'll just play a clip of that now.
Scared to confess what I'm feeling, frightened you'll slip away. You must love me. You must love me.
As that song is sung, we see Eva being wheeled in a chair by nurses. She's looking very pale and gaunt, and she asks, where do we go from here? And reveals her fears about her approaching death. Alone, she then says she feels sorry for a country about to be denied her presence, which is slightly egomaniacal. The crowd still call for her, and she's helped onto the balcony by Juan Peron before telling the crowd in yet another version of Don't Cry For Me, Argentina, that she has she's decided to decline the titles offered her. Although her illness is not public knowledge, there is a hint of her awareness that she's going to die soon, as she tells them that she will not leave them, although it may get harder for them to see her.
Next, in the closing scenes of the movie, we see the crowd bowed under umbrellas in pouring rain, holding pictures of Evita and candles as they hold a vigil. Clearly near the end of her life, Evita weakly sings to Peron that although she's dying young, she has seen the lights and lived most brightly under them. The lights in a room watched by the crowd outside go out, and we see Argentinian flags fall to half-mast as crowds gather and queue to pass her coffin, where she's lying in state. Peron stands to one side, Shay on the other. Shay sings the Lament song as he kisses the screen above Eva's head and walks away. A stunned Peron hears a bell toll as more people file past the coffin, then the screen fades and the credits roll. End movie.
Yeah, I found the ending a little bit abrupt. It was
it did come
and sorry, she's dead, gone. Finished.
So, she was diagnosed with cervical cancer in 1951.
Yep.
But this was kept from her initially and from the public for much longer. Apparently, Peron got some cancer operation expert from America and told her that she had appendicitis and she had her uterus removed, and she didn't even know, apparently.
Well, they wanted to do... There was one of her doctors who suggested a hysterectomy, and she was furious with him. And then I think she was told it was going to be a different operation.
Yeah, right. And so that's pretty... Well, I guess it's 1950s where the husband called the shots, but it's pretty bad.
Yeah. She had chemotherapy, which was very revolutionary at that stage. But during this time, even though she's struggling with the illness, the matter of her vice presidency did arise. A huge rally of her descamisados gathered. It's said to be about 2 million people around the Casa Rosada, and urging her to stand. The Argentinian constitution states that the presidency, in the event of his or her death, will be succeeded by the vice president. So the army and senior politicians just could not countenance her being Juan's running mate.
So she withdrew under pressure, but the movie gets that right, doesn't it? She wasn't being called upon.
It's not clear whether she realised it was reaching too far or she really wanted to, and he put his foot down and said no. We don't know if she genuinely wanted to or not. But the final speeches, her final speeches became increasingly belligerent, calling for people to fight the oligarchy. She called Peron's opponents as cold as toads and snakes, and there was a rumour that she was trying to buy weapons from abroad to arm workers' militias. The BBC ran a story in 2015 suggesting that she also underwent a lobotomy at this time, which was all the rage in America. A pretemporal lobotomy. Now, if she did, it might have been to try and ease the pain from the cancer in her treatments, but it might also have been trying to tone down her inflammatory, defiant and angry speeches she was making in support of him. And we've got a little clip here, and this is the real Eva Peron speaking to a crowd. Now, obviously it's in Spanish, but you can kind of hear the tone.
Las que están presentes hoy, porque han tomado el porvenir en sus manos y saben que la justicia y la libertad la encontrarán únicamente teniendo al general Perón dirigiendo la nación.
So even though we don't have any images to share with you, being a podcast, you can tell from the tone that she's been quite inflammatory and quite passionate. Despite all the medical attention that she got, she died on the 26th of July 1952. The reaction of the populace is pretty well portrayed in the movie. Both the opening scene, remember, where we saw this massive funeral, and now this final one where we see the funeral again. Millions of Argentinians who attended and filed past her coffin attest to the general awe and affection with which she was being held.
Yeah, what happened next was Perón went on to rule an increasingly impoverished Argentina. He'd lose the next election, be forced into exile, moving to Franco's Spain. He was urged by some of his close advisors to not accept that election result and fight it. And to his credit, he said, no, I'm not here to create a civil war. Or maybe he would have considered it if he thought he could have won one. So he went to Franco's Spain. He would eventually return in 1973, be elected president again, but he died a year later, and his third wife, Isabella Peron, who, unlike Evita, did become vice president, then took over, and she in turn would be deposed by a military coup in 76, and Argentina would enter its darkest years, with tens of thousands of people becoming what became known as the disappeared. Opponents and critics of the military government, however mild their form of protest was, were abducted, tortured to reveal other anti-government activists, and then murdered, their bodies hidden or destroyed.
All this heavy-handed action was supported by the USA as part of what they call Operation Condor.
It's actively encouraged the eradication of left-wing activists in Latin America. Facing increasingly hostile opposition at home, despite the government's death squads, the military junta chose to take Shakespeare's advice and, to paraphrase Henry IV's dizzy Argentinian minds with foreign quarrels, they invaded the Falkland Islands, or Malvinas in Spanish, thank you. After losing that war, the military junta were eventually replaced in 83, and Argentina regained a semblance of democracy. Most of the surviving military commanders of that era are still serving prison sentences.
As for Evita herself, after Juan Perón's defeat in the 1955 election, the new government banned Peronism and tried to eradicate all memory of it. Part of the plan involved having Evita's embalmed body secretly shipped to Italy in 1957 with the assistance of the Vatican, who had her buried in a Milanese cemetery under a false name headstone. In 1971, with the country in political turmoil and the Peronist Party finally legalised again, Evita's body was returned to her husband in Spain. Apparently, the embalming did such a good job all these years later, some 20 years later, that she looked the same as she did on the day that she died. After Juan's re-election in 73, then sudden death in 74, his third wife Isabella and newly promoted president had Evita's body repatriated to Argentina, where she was finally buried in the Recoleta cemetery in Buenos Aires.
Which is full of the great and the good, so she didn't get buried with the descomisados, she got buried with the oligarchy, yeah.
Her legacy is still being disputed today. Was she a saint or a sinner? Was she a self-serving demagogue or champion of the people? It seems to depend on your political viewpoint, and opinions it's rare to find an objective summary of her life.
And that's the summary that, in one objective summary that Fraser and Navarro make in their book, in their biography of her. You speak to Argentinians and they're either, if they're Peronists, she was a saint, and all the bad stuff said about her was untrue. If they're anti-Peronist, then she was a complete sinner and a demagogue and ruthlessly ambitious. And the few Argentinians in between, and they do say the Argentinian character, apparently they're obsessed with death, relics of dead heroes. General Belgrano, who was the man who largely credited with their independence from the Spanish back in the 1800s, apparently there were bits of him one town would say, "We've got his hand," and another town would go, "No, we've got his hand," and so have they. And it's like the saints' relics in the Middle Ages.
Yeah, like apparently there's 14 churches across Europe that claim to be the keepers of the holy foreskin.
Right.
That sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
So
I don't think it's our place to try and judge Peronism as a political movement.
But she died at the age of, 32 or something?
32,
She
yeah.
achieved an awful lot for someone so young.
Yeah.
And she's got a legacy that continues to this day. As we say, she's got a lot of fans, and some of her monuments and achievements, like Evita City, still stand.
And I think it's fair to say that hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Argentinians were better off by the end of the Peron reign or presidency than they were at the beginning.
So that's a good thing.
Others were dead who wouldn't otherwise have been, but maybe other different ones would have been dead. It's difficult. It's a fascinating country. It's an incredibly complex and sophisticated country in many ways, but it struggles with itself more than with anything else, it would seem.
It would. So what about the movie? Let's wrap it up.
Yeah.
We've disparaged it a little bit, saying that there's too much singing and not enough dialogue. I didn't like the movie, I must say.
I expected it to be like pulling teeth, and actually I didn't find it as bad as I thought, but that's not to say I would choose to sit down and watch it. I think we're both not quite in the Gary Shavit school of thought, but not far off.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, I suppose when Gary said you'd have to do something pretty extraordinary to make me watch it, well, we are producing a podcast, so we had no choice. Yeah, given a choice, I wouldn't.
Entertainment, what do you reckon? 4 or 5?
4 or 5,
4 or 5.
You say 4, I'll say 5.
Okay, 4. I'm happy with that.
Accuracy, I think the whole theme throughout the whole thing,
seems
it
flawed.
may be true, but it's so biased.
It's very partisan, isn't it?
It's almost
not objective at all.
Methinks the lady doth protest too much.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure I'm going to...
5 for history?
I'll give it 5, you give it 6.
Okay.
4.5 for entertainment, 5.5 for
which is
history.
pretty low for us.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's up next?
Okay, so we've got Lincoln next, and
2
after
weeks.
that, In the Heart of the Sea. We do hope you enjoyed this episode, and whilst I wouldn't necessarily recommend anyone who hasn't seen it to go rush out and buy the DVD of Evita, if you're interested in Eva Peron, there are a host of documentaries available on YouTube. Clips of the real Eva Peron, many of them with English subtitles, and you can see, I think Madonna actually did a pretty good job capturing her. She's not the best actress, but she is a superb singer. And
she's a dead ringer for Eva Peron. The similarities are very, very close physically when she's done up as Evita Peron.
Yeah.
And just to return, In the Heart of the Sea, that's the Ron Howard movie that they say tells the story that proved the inspiration for Moby Dick, yeah?
That's correct.
Great.
And it's I've seen it. It's a good film. It's not Ron Howard's best, but it raises some fascinating themes, questions, and situations that we can get our teeth into, if you'll forgive the pun.
Okay, so let's wrap it up for this week, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks with Lincoln.
Thanks very much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Don't cry for me, Argentina, for I am ordinary, unimportant, and undeserving of such attention. Unless we all are, I think we all are. So share my glory, so share my coffin. So share my glory, So share my coffin.
It's our funeral too.